They laughed at the human recruit until the apex predator took orders from her. Chapter 1, Arrival at Teratos 9, the transport shuttle, Meridian's Hope, shuddered as it broke through the atmospheric barrier of Teratos 9, its hull groaning against the planet's dense, methane-laced atmosphere. Aria Vexley pressed her face to the viewport, watching the sprawling military complex emerge from the orange-tinged clouds below. The Constellation Guard Command's most remote outpost looked like a metallic spider sprawled across the barren landscape, its 8 primary sectors connected by covered walkways that gleamed under the alien sun's harsh light. First time seeing a real guard station, human? The voice came from behind her, dripping with barely concealed amusement. Arya turned to face Commander Zethkar, a towering hegemony officer whose crystalline exoskeleton caught the shuttle's interior lighting like a prism. His forearms were crossed in what she'd learned was a gesture of disdain among his species. "First time this far from Earth?" "Yes, sir," Arya replied, keeping her voice steady despite the knot of anxiety in her stomach. At 26, she was young for such an assignment, but her record in xenobiology and animal behavior had somehow earned her a place in the most elite military force in known space. Zethkar's mandibles clicked, the hegemony equivalent of a chuckle. "Earth, that backwater planet that just discovered faster than light travel 5 cycles ago." He leaned closer, his compound eyes reflecting dozens of tiny areas. "Tell me, recruit, what exactly do you think a primitive species like yours can contribute to the Guard?" Before Arya could respond, the shuttle's pilot, a reptilian saurid with scales the color of burnished copper, called back, "Docking in 30 seconds. Prepare for gravity shift." The artificial gravity field fluctuated as they locked onto the station's docking arm, and Arya felt her stomach lurch. She'd spent months training for this moment, studying the Guard's protocols, learning the basic languages of 7 different species, and pushing her body to its limits in preparation for alien environments. But nothing had prepared her for the casual contempt she'd encountered from her fellow officers. The airlock hissed open, and Arya grabbed her single duffel bag, everything she owned that could accompany her to this distant posting. The station's air tasted recycled and metallic, carrying undertones of ozone and something else she couldn't identify. Something wild. "Recruit Vexley." The voice belonged to a Valdorian, a species known for their methodical nature and elephant-like appearance. Lieutenant Caro stood nearly 8 feet tall, his gray hide marked with the intricate tattoos that denoted his rank and achievements. Unlike Zethkar, his tone held no mockery, only weary resignation. "I am your assigned liaison. Welcome to Teratos 9. "Thank you, sir." Arya fell into step beside him as they moved through corridors lined with transparent aluminum windows. Through them, she could see the station's various sectors, training facilities, research labs, weapons testing ranges, and in the distance, something that looked like a massive containment complex. "Your assignment briefing was minimal," Kara said, his trunk-like appendage curling thoughtfully. "High Command simply stated you were to report to the Chimera Division. Are you familiar with our work here?" Arya shook her head. "The file I received was heavily redacted. I know Teratos 9 serves as a training facility for elite Guard units. But beyond that," Kara stopped walking and turned to face her, his small but intelligent eyes studying her carefully. "Teratos 9 is indeed a training facility, but not in the way most imagine. We deal with creatures that conventional military doctrine considers unmanageable. The Chimera Division specifically handles apex predators from across the galaxy, being so dangerous that most species won't even attempt to approach them, let alone train them for combat applications." A chill ran down Arya's spine. "Combat applications?" "The theory," Karras continued as they resumed walking, "is that if we can harness the natural abilities of the galaxy's most efficient killers, we can create an unstoppable force for the Guard. In practice," he paused at a massive security door marked with warnings in 12 different languages. "In practice, we lose more trainers than we graduate combat teams." The security scanner swept over them both with beams of blue light, and the door rumbled open to reveal a sight that took Arya's breath away. The Chimera Division occupied an enormous circular chamber with dozens of specialized containment units arranged in concentric rings. Each unit was different, some filled with dense forests from distant worlds, others mimicking ocean depths or volcanic plains. And in each one moved shapes that defied easy description. "Welcome to the menagerie," Kara said, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of roars, hisses, and sounds that had no human equivalent. "Home to the most dangerous predators from 200 worlds." Arya's eyes were drawn to a containment unit near the center of the complex. Unlike the others, this one was darker, its transparent walls tinted almost black. She could see movement within, something large pacing in the shadows, but the details were hidden. "What's in that one?" she asked. Karis followed her gaze and his trunk curled tighter. "That would be Ferak's prime designation VK7, though the staff have taken to calling it Morok, an old Saurid word meaning death that stalks. It's a creature from the Outer Rim, from a world so hostile that even the Void Hunters won't set foot there." He turned to her with what she was beginning to recognize as sympathy. "And as of today, it's your responsibility." Chapter 2, The Beast in the Shadows. The briefing room was cramped and smelled of ozone from overworked environmental systems. Arya sat across from Dr. Thane Korus, the Chimera Division's chief researcher, a human like herself, though one who'd clearly been stationed on Teratos 9 for far too long. His hair had gone prematurely gray, and his hands shook slightly as he activated the holographic display. "Before we begin," Dr. Korus said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too much, "I want you to understand that you weren't actually assigned to this position. You were sentenced to it." Arya frowned. "I don't understand." "High Command has been trying to shut down the Chimera Division for 3 years. We're expensive, we're dangerous, and our success rate is—" He gestured helplessly. "Well, it's not what you'd call encouraging, but the brass can't quite bring themselves to pull the plug because occasionally, very occasionally, we achieve something remarkable." The hologram flickered to life, showing a 3-dimensional image of a creature that made Arya's breath catch in her throat. It stood roughly 10 feet tall on 4 powerful legs, its body a study in lethal efficiency. Its hide appeared to be some kind of natural armor, dark as midnight and covered in bony ridges. But it was the head that truly captured her attention. Elongated and predatory, with 6 eyes arranged in pairs along its skull and a mouth filled with teeth that seemed designed for one purpose only. "Ferak's prime," Dr. Korus continued, "is what we classify as a perfect predator, intelligence equivalent to a human 8-year-old, but focused entirely on hunting and survival. Reflexes faster than anything we've measured, strength sufficient to tear through battle armor, and a sensory suite that can track prey across continents." "Where did it come from?" "A world called Shadowmere in the Outer Rim. The survey team that found it described the planet as a testing ground for evolution's worst nightmares. Everything there is designed to kill everything else. This particular specimen was captured during a military action, the only survivor of its pack." Arya studied the rotating image. Despite its fearsome appearance, there was something in the creature's posture that spoke to her, an alertness that suggested more than simple animal cunning. "How long has it been here?" 18 months. In that time, it's killed 4 trainers and injured 12 others. The previous trainer, a void hunter named Skarthak, lasted longer than most, nearly 3 months, before Morok decided it had had enough. Korus met her eyes. They found pieces of Skarthak in 6 different locations throughout the containment unit. The hologram shifted, showing video feeds from inside the creature's enclosure. Arya watched as it moved through the artificial environment, a recreation of Shadowmere's hunting grounds, complete with twisted metal trees and pools of dark water. Its movement was hypnotic, each step deliberate and purposeful. "So why me?" Arya asked. "I'm not a warrior. I'm not even trained in xenobiology beyond the basics." Dr. Korus smiled grimly. "Because High Command has run out of volunteers. The other species won't risk their people anymore. And frankly, most humans are too smart to accept the assignment. But you," he pulled up her file, "you have something interesting in your background. Before joining the Guard, you worked with Earth predators. Lions, tigers, bears, creatures that could easily kill a human, but sometimes choose not to. That's completely different. Earth predators evolved alongside humans. We understand their behavior patterns, their social structures. Do we? Dr. Chorus interrupted. Or do we just tell ourselves that because it makes us feel safer? He stood and moved to the window overlooking the menagerie. I've been studying predators for 15 years, Arya, and the one thing I've learned is that the relationship between predator and prey isn't always about strength or size or weapons. Sometimes it's about something much more subtle. Arya joined him at the window. Below, she could see technicians moving between the containment units, tending to creatures that could end their lives in seconds. Yet they moved with confidence, following protocols that had been written in blood and refined through sacrifice. What do you want me to do? I want you to survive, Dr. Chorus said simply. That would be a victory in itself. But if you can somehow establish any kind of working relationship with Morok. He trailed off, staring at the darkened containment unit. There are theories that perfect predators like Ferax Prime might be capable of forming bonds with other species. Not domestication, that's impossible, but something more like partnership. And if I can't, Cordy was quiet for a long moment, then at least your death might provide enough data to finally convince High Command to shut us down. Sometimes that's the only victory we can hope for. Chapter 3, First Contact. Arya's quarters were sparse but functional, a bed, a desk, a small food preparation unit, and a single window that looked out over Teratus 9's training grounds. She'd spent her first night studying everything the station's computers contained about Ferax Prime behavior, physiology, and previous interactions with trainers. The files made for grim reading. Now, standing before the entrance to Morok's containment unit, she tried to push those statistics from her mind. The security chief, a stoic carrion named Voss, checked her equipment one final time. Emergency beacon, he said, tapping the device clipped to her collar. If things go badly, activate it and we'll flood the chamber with stun gas. Might buy you enough time to reach the exit. Might. Voss's scaled features remained impassive. Ferax Prime has shown resistance to most non-lethal deterrents. The gas will slow it down, but if it's truly committed to killing you, he shrugged. Make your peace with whatever gods you follow. The containment unit's entrance dilated open with a soft hiss, revealing an airlock chamber. Beyond the second door lay Morok's domain, a carefully crafted replica of Shadowmere's most dangerous regions. Twisted spires of dark metal jutted from the ground like petrified trees, and pools of black water reflected the dim, reddish lighting that mimicked the creature's homeworld sun. Arya stepped through the airlock and immediately felt the change in atmosphere. The air was thicker here, with a higher methane content that made her breathing apparatus work harder. The artificial gravity was also increased to match Shadowmere's heavier pull, making each step more deliberate. She moved slowly into the enclosure, following the established protocol of staying near the entrance while announcing her presence. "Hello," she called out, feeling foolish but committed to treating this like any other animal introduction. "My name is Arya. I'm here too." The attack came without warning. One moment she was standing alone among the metal trees, the next a shadow detached itself from the darkness and rushed toward her with terrifying speed. Arya threw herself sideways, rolling behind one of the twisted spires as claws raked the air where she'd been standing. Morok landed gracefully 10 feet away, its 6 eyes fixed on her hiding spot. Up close, it was even more magnificent and terrifying than the holographic display had suggested. Its dark hide rippled with muscle beneath the armored plates, and when it opened its mouth, she could see rows of teeth designed to tear through anything unfortunate enough to be caught. But it didn't attack again. Instead, it began to circle her position, moving with the fluid grace of a natural-born killer. Its eyes never left her, studying her movements, cataloging her weaknesses, planning its next move. Arya forced herself to breathe slowly and think. This wasn't random aggression. It was a test. Morok was evaluating her the same way a lion might size up an unfamiliar human who'd entered its territory. The question was, how did she respond? Fighting was out of the question. Even with the guard's best equipment, she'd last seconds against a creature like this. Running would only trigger its prey drive. That left. "You're beautiful," she said quietly, not moving from behind the spire. "Absolutely magnificent. I bet you were the apex predator on your world, weren't you? Nothing could challenge you except others of your own kind." Morok paused in its circling, one foot raised as if frozen mid-step. Its head tilted slightly, and Arya realized that her words, or perhaps her tone, had caught its attention. She kept talking, using the same calm, respectful voice she'd once used with injured predators back on Earth. I know you didn't choose to be here. You were taken from your home, your territory, your pack. That must be incredibly difficult, confusing. The creature's eyes narrowed, and it took a single step closer. Not stalking now, but investigating. Arya slowly moved out from behind the spire, keeping her hands visible and her movements non-threatening. I'm not here to hurt you, she continued. I'm not here to control you or break you or turn you into something you're not. I'm just curious about you, about how your mind works, what you think about when you're alone in here. Morok stopped just beyond striking distance, its massive head lowered as it studied her. This close, Arya could see the intelligence in those alien eyes. Not human intelligence, but something equally complex. A mind shaped by eons of evolution on a world where only the perfect survived. She reached slowly into her equipment pouch and withdrew a piece of synthetic meat, high-protein rations designed to supplement the creature's diet. Instead of throwing it or offering it directly, she placed it on the ground between them and stepped back. A gift, she said simply. No strings attached, no expectations. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Morok lowered its head and sniffed the offering. Its tongue, long and black and designed for stripping meat from bone, flicked out to taste the synthetic protein. Apparently finding it acceptable, the creature consumed the ration in a single bite. When it looked up again, something had changed in its expression. The immediate threat assessment was complete, and it had apparently decided that Arya was not a danger, at least not one worth killing immediately. Well, Arya murmured, feeling her heart rate beginning to slow. That's a start. Chapter 4. Building bridges over the following weeks, Arya established a routine that raised eyebrows throughout the station. Instead of the aggressive dominance training favored by previous handlers, she approached Morok more like a researcher studying a new species than a trainer breaking a beast. She spent hours simply observing the creature's behavior patterns, taking notes on everything from its sleep cycles to its preferred hunting grounds within the enclosure. She learned that Morok was most active during the facility's artificial night cycle, when the lighting mimicked Shadowmere's dim red sun. She discovered that it had favorite resting spots, always positioned with multiple escape routes and clear sight lines to potential threats. This is ridiculous, Commander Zethkar announced during one of the weekly progress reviews. His crystalline exoskeleton reflected the conference room's harsh lighting as he gestured dismissively at Arya's reports. She's been in there for 3 weeks and accomplished nothing. No behavioral modification, no combat training, no progress toward deployment readiness. Dr. Chorus leaned forward, his weathered face serious. Actually, Commander, I'd argue that Arya has accomplished something unprecedented. She spent more time in close proximity to a Ferax Prime than any handler in recorded history. And more importantly, she's still alive. Survival is not the objective here, Zethkar snapped. We need combat assets, not zoological observations. Arya kept her voice level despite her frustration. With respect, sir, you can't turn something into a combat asset until you understand what it is. Morok isn't just a weapon waiting to be pointed at enemies. It's an intelligent being with its own motivations, fears, and decision-making processes. It's a predator, Lieutenant Karras interjected, though his tone was more thoughtful than dismissive. On its homeworld, it survived by killing everything it encountered. That's not a decision-making process. That's programming. Then explain this. Arya activated the room's holographic display, showing footage from the previous day's session. On the screen, Morok could be seen following her around the enclosure at a respectful distance, occasionally moving ahead to investigate something before returning to its position behind her left shoulder. The room fell silent as they watched the apex predator, a creature that had killed 4 trained handlers, walking beside the human recruit like some enormous, deadly pet. How? Dr. Chorus whispered. Arya smiled. I asked myself what Morok wanted. Not what we wanted from it, but what it wanted for itself. And I realized that beneath all that perfectly evolved killing machinery is a being that's been completely isolated from its own kind. It's intelligent enough to be lonely. She gestured to the display, where Morok was now lying in a relaxed position while Arya sat nearby, making notes on a datapad. Ferax Prime are pack hunters. They evolved to work together to communicate, to form social bonds. When we captured this one, we didn't just take it from its territory, we condemned it to solitary confinement. So you became its pack? Karis asked. I became something it could relate to. Not prey, not a threat, but a companion of sorts. Someone who acknowledged its intelligence and treated it with respect. Arya paused the playback as Marok's head turned toward her position in the recording. The breakthrough came when I realized it had been testing me from the beginning. Every interaction, every apparent moment of aggression, it was gathering data about my reactions, my intentions, my character. Commander Zethkar's mandibles clicked skeptically. And you believe this friendship makes it suitable for combat deployment? I believe this relationship makes it possible to explore combat deployment, Arya corrected. But we're nowhere near that stage yet. First, I need to establish basic communication protocols. Communication? Darkoris leaned forward. You mean beyond what you've already achieved? Arya nodded. Marok understands much more than it lets on. I've been working on a basic gesture language. Nothing complex, just simple concepts like safe, danger, food, rest, and it's been responding. She switched to another video file, this one showing her making a series of hand gestures while Morok watched intently. When she made what appeared to be a specific sign, the creature moved to a particular area of the enclosure and lay down. That's the sign for rest, Arya explained. And this? She showed another sequence where a different gesture caused Morok to move to its feeding area. Means food. It's basic, but it's a foundation we can build on. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Lieutenant Karras spoke carefully. Recruit Vexley, are you suggesting that this creature can be trained to follow complex commands? I'm suggesting that it's intelligent enough to be a partner rather than just a weapon, which opens up possibilities that go far beyond traditional combat deployment. Commander Zethkar stood abruptly, his forearms crossed in clear disapproval. This is exactly the kind of thinking that has made the Chimera Division a waste of resources. We don't need partners. We need tools. Weapons that can be deployed against our enemies without hesitation or independent thought. Then maybe, Arya said quietly, you're approaching this entirely wrong. The tension in the room ratcheted up several degrees. Dr. Chorus shot her a warning look, but Arya pressed on. Every species in the Constellation Guard brings their own strengths to the Alliance. The hegemony provides tactical brilliance and coordination. The Valdorians offer methodical planning and logistics. The Saurids contribute adaptability and technical innovation. But what do humans bring? Expendability, apparently, Zethkar said coldly. No, Arya stood and faced the commander directly. We bring the ability to form bonds with other species, to find common ground where others see only differences, to turn enemies into allies and strangers into friends. She gestured toward the display where Morok waited patiently in its enclosure. That creature out there isn't just a perfect predator, it's a thinking being capable of choice. And given the option between serving out of fear or fighting alongside someone it trusts, she let the implication hang in the air. You're gambling with forces you don't understand, Zethkar warned. Ferax Prime are not pets. They are apex predators with intelligence enough to hold grudges and plan revenge. What happens when your friend decides you're no longer useful? Arya met his compound gaze without flinching. Then I suppose we'll find out just how well I've come to understand it. Chapter 5, Deepening Bonds. The breakthrough came 3 weeks later during what should have been a routine morning session. Arya had been working with Marok on more complex gesture combinations, trying to establish concepts like together and separate, when the station's emergency alarm began blaring. The sound was deafening within the containment unit, a harsh klaxon that sent Morok into immediate high alert. The creature's 6 eyes swept the enclosure for threats, while its body dropped into a predatory crouch. But instead of fleeing or attacking, it moved closer to Arya, positioning itself between her and the potential danger. It's okay, Arya said. making the safe gesture with her hands while raising her voice over the alarm. It's just a drill. No danger. But Morok wasn't buying it. Its head turned toward the main observation window, where Dr. Chorus and his team could usually be seen monitoring the session. Today, however, the observation deck was empty. Emergency protocol called for all non-essential personnel to evacuate to designated safe zones during alerts. The creature looked back at Arya, then toward the observation deck again. Its meaning was clear. If there was no danger, where was everyone? You're right, Arya admitted. Something is happening. But the alarm could mean anything. System malfunction, atmospheric breach, incoming transport. She trailed off as she noticed Morok's behavior becoming more agitated. Its nostrils flared as it scented the air, and a low rumble built in its throat. Then she heard it too, a sound that chilled her blood. Distant weapons fire echoing through the station's corridors. Teratos 9 was under attack. Arya's training kicked in, and she began moving toward the enclosure's exit. The protocol was clear. During station emergencies, all personnel were to evacuate to secure positions and await further orders. But as she reached the airlock, she realized Morok wasn't following her. Instead, the creature had moved to the center of the enclosure and was staring directly at her. Its head tilted in what she'd learned was a questioning gesture. "I have to go," she said, making the separate gesture. "You need to stay here where it's safe." Morok's response was immediate and unmistakable. It shook its massive head from side to side, a motion it had learned from watching her, and then made a gesture of its own. One powerful foreleg extended toward her, while the other pointed toward itself. Together. The station shuddered under some massive impact, and through the observation windows, Arya could see emergency lights strobing in the main complex. Whatever was happening out there, it was getting worse. She looked at Morok, seeing something in those alien eyes she'd never quite recognized before. Not just intelligence or curiosity, but concern. The apex predator was worried about her. "I can't take you with me," she said. "The containment protocols." Another explosion, closer this time. The lights in the enclosure flickered, and Arya heard the distinctive whine of energy weapons discharging somewhere in the station's depths. Morok moved to the airlock door and placed one massive paw against the control panel. It looked back at her expectantly, waiting for her to unlock the exit. "If I let you out during an emergency, they'll consider it a breach of containment, court-martial, prison, maybe execution." Arya's hands shook as she considered her options. "And if whatever's attacking us gets to you..." The creature moved closer, lowering its head until they were at eye level. For a moment, predator and humans simply stared at each other. Then Morok did something it had never done before. It pressed its massive forehead gently against hers. The gesture was unmistakably affectionate, trusting. A pact bond between beings who had found understanding across the vast gulf of species and evolution. "All right," Arya whispered, her decision made. "But if we're doing this, we're doing it together." She activated her emergency codes and watched the containment unit's locks disengage. The airlock cycled open, and for the first time in 18 months, Morok stepped outside its artificial habitat. The creature paused at the threshold, its senses taking in the unfamiliar environment of the station proper. Then it looked at Arya and waited for her to take the lead. They moved through the Chimera Division's main chamber together, past containment units that held other deadly predators, most of which had become agitated by the alarms and distant sounds of battle. Morok showed no interest in the other creatures, its attention focused entirely on following Arya's lead. The corridor beyond the menagerie was empty, lit only by emergency lighting that cast everything in stark red and shadow. Arya consulted her datapad, checking the station's emergency protocols for her assigned evacuation route. She was supposed to report to Safety Zone C, located in the station's most heavily armored section. But as they moved through the corridors, it became clear that the normal evacuation routes were compromised. Blast doors had sealed several passages, and she could hear the sounds of combat growing louder in the direction of the main safety zones. "This way," she murmured, taking a detour toward the maintenance sections. If they could reach the secondary command center, she might be able to find out what was happening and how she could help. Morok followed without question, its massive form moving with surprising silence through the metal corridors. But as they approached a junction near the station's central core, the creature suddenly stopped and moved in front of Arya, blocking her path. "What is it?" she whispered. Morok's head was raised, testing the air. Its 6 eyes were fixed on something around the corner ahead, something Arya couldn't see or hear. The creature's body language screamed danger. Then she heard them. Footsteps, but not the heavy boots of guard personnel. These were different, lighter skittering sounds like claws on metal, and there were many of them. The silent swarm had reached the inner sections of the station. Chapter 6, The Enemy Revealed. Arya had heard of the silent swarm in briefings, but seeing them in person was a different matter entirely. They flowed around the corner like a living tide, bipedal insectoids with chitinous armor and faces that seemed designed by nightmares. Each stood roughly human height, but moved with the coordinated precision of a hive mind. What made them truly terrifying wasn't their claws or their numbers, but their absolute silence. They communicated through pheromones and bioelectric fields, making them nearly impossible to track or anticipate. The first sign of a swarm attack was usually the discovery of bodies. There were at least 20 of them in the corridor ahead, systematically checking each room and alcove as they advanced toward the station's core. Their movements were methodical, efficient, and utterly ruthless. Arya pressed herself against the wall, hoping they would pass by the maintenance junction without investigating. But Morok had other ideas. The Pharax Prime had gone completely still, every muscle in its powerful body coiled for action. This was what it had been created for, the perfect predator facing worthy prey. She could see the calculation in its eyes as it assessed the enemy's numbers, positions, and potential weaknesses. "No," Arya whispered, placing a hand on the creature's armored flank. "There are too many. We need to find another way." But the decision was taken out of their hands when one of the swarm warriors detected their scent. Its head snapped toward their position, mandibles clicking in what might have been communication. Within seconds, the entire group had oriented on their hiding spot. The lead warrior rounded the corner, its claws extended and dripping with some kind of paralytic venom. It stopped when it saw Morok, its compound eyes reflecting confusion. The creature before it didn't match any known guard species, and for a moment, the swarm warrior hesitated. That moment was all Morok needed. The Pharax Prime exploded into motion with a speed that defied its size. 1 second it was standing beside Arya. The next it was among the swarm warriors like a force of nature made flesh. Its claws, designed to tear through the armored hide of the Shadowmere's apex predators, made short work of chitinous armor. Its teeth evolved to crush bone, shattered exoskeletons like glass. But what truly shocked Arya wasn't the violence. She'd known Morok was capable of incredible destruction. What shocked her was the precision. The creature wasn't just killing randomly, it was fighting with tactical intelligence, using the corridor's geometry to prevent the swarm from surrounding it, isolating individuals from the group, creating openings for follow-up attacks. The silent swarm had evolved to fight as a unified organism, but they'd never encountered a predator that could disrupt their coordination through sheer individual superiority. Morok tore through their ranks like a blade through silk, and within moments, the corridor was littered with the remains of what had been a perfectly coordinated assault force. When the last warrior fell, Morok returned to Arya's side, its dark hide now stained with the bioluminescent fluids that served as swarm blood. It showed no signs of injury or fatigue. If anything, it seemed more alert than before, energized by the combat. "Are you all right?" Arya asked, checking the creature for wounds. Morok allowed the examination, even tilting its head to give her better access to its neck and shoulders. She found a few scratches where swarm claws had found gaps in its natural armor, but nothing serious. A sound from deeper in the station caught their attention. More weapons fire, but this time it was the distinctive whine of guard energy weapons. Somewhere the station's defenders were fighting back. Arya consulted her datapad again, trying to determine where the fighting was heaviest. The station's sensor network was partially compromised, but she could see concentrations of activity near the command center in the main armory. "This is what you were bred for, isn't it?" she said, looking at Morok as the creature sniffed the air for more enemies. "Not to be a pet or a partner, but to be the perfect warrior." Morok's response surprised her. Instead of the aggressive posture she expected, the creature moved closer and pressed its forehead against hers again. The same gesture of affection and trust it had shown in the containment unit. Then it pulled back and made a gesture with its foreleg, pointing first at itself, then at her, then toward the sounds of battle. Together. You want to fight alongside the station's defenders, Arya realized. Not just hunt the swarm, but actually coordinate with the guard forces. Morok nodded, another human gesture it had learned and adapted for its own use. Arya made her decision. All right, but if we're going to do this, we need to do it smart. The other guard personnel have never seen anything like you. They might mistake you for another swarm variant and shoot first. She activated her communicator, hoping the station's internal network was still functional. Emergency Command, this is Recruit Vexley from the Chimera Division. I'm in Section C7 with a combat asset, requesting coordination with defensive operations. Static filled the channel for several seconds. Then a familiar voice responded. Vexley? This is Lieutenant Kuros. What's your status? Alive and mobile, sir. I have a trained predator with me that's proven effective against swarm forces. Requesting permission to assist in station defense. Negative, recruit. Evacuate to the nearest safe zone immediately. The swarm has penetrated multiple sections, and we can't guarantee— Sir, Arya interrupted. With respect, the safe zones are compromised. I've already encountered and eliminated a swarm patrol. My asset and I are better equipped to provide mobile defense than to sit in a bunker waiting for rescue. Another pause, longer this time. Then, define combat asset, recruit. Arya looked at Morok, who was watching her with those intelligent eyes. Ferax Prime designation VK7, sir, fully trained and under my direct control. The silence that followed was so long that Arya began to wonder if the connection had been lost. Finally, Karras's voice returned, heavy with disbelief and what might have been fear. Vexley, you're telling me you've released the Morok from containment? Yes, sir. And it's following your orders? More like we're working together, sir. Mother of stars. Karras's voice trailed off, and Arya could hear other voices in the background. Urgent consultations and what sounded like argument. Finally, he returned to the channel. Recruit, I'm ordering you to proceed to Command Section Alpha. We're taking heavy casualties, and if your partner can do what you claim— We're on our way, Arya said, already moving toward the indicated section with Morok beside her. As they navigated the station's increasingly damaged corridors, Arya couldn't help but marvel at the situation. 6 months ago, she'd been a veterinary assistant on a backwater planet, working with Earth predators that most people considered dangerous. Now she was running through a space station under siege, accompanied by one of the most lethal creatures in known space, heading into combat against an enemy that had nightmares. And somehow, despite the terror and uncertainty, she felt more alive than she ever had before. Chapter 7, Alliance Under Fire. The Command Section Alpha was a fortress within a fortress, thick armor plating, redundant life support systems, and defensive positions designed to hold against any conceivable assault. But as Arya and Morok approached through the maintenance quarters, it was clear that the swarm had found ways to test even these formidable defenses. Emergency lighting cast everything in harsh shadows, and the air tasted of ozone and fear. Through the transparent aluminum windows that lined the approach corridor, Arya could see the command center's main floor, a circular chamber filled with holographic displays and tactical stations. At least 30 guard personnel from various species worked frantically at their positions, coordinating the station's defense. But it was what surrounded the command center that made her heart race. The swarm had somehow infiltrated the outer corridors, and she could see their dark forms moving in the shadows beyond the main defensive perimeter. They were probing for weaknesses, testing the guards' responses, preparing for a coordinated assault. Halt! The voice came from a concealed guard position near the command center's main entrance. A Sarid soldier emerged from cover, his energy rifle trained on Morok. Identify yourself and explain the presence of that creature. Recruit Arya Vexley, Chimera Division. She called back, hands raised to show she was unarmed. This is Ferax Prime VK7 under my direct supervision. Lieutenant Karras is expecting you. The guard's scales shifted color, a sign of extreme agitation among his species. That thing is supposed to be in containment. How do I know it won't? Morok chose that moment to demonstrate exactly how much control Arya had over it. Without any visible signal from her, the creature moved to her left side and sat back on its haunches in a position that was clearly non-threatening. Its 6 eyes remained alert, but its body language conveyed patience and discipline. As you can see, Arya said calmly, it's fully trained and under control. The guard stared for a moment longer, then activated his communicator. Command, this is Sentry Post 1. Recruit Vexley and her asset have arrived. Send them in, came Karis's voice over the channel. Immediately. The command center's main floor was a study in organized chaos. Officers from half a dozen species coordinated defensive operations, while massive holographic displays showed the station's status in real time. Large sections glowed red, areas already lost to the swarm or cut off from central command. Other areas flickered between green and yellow as defensive positions held or fell. Lieutenant Karis looked like he'd aged 10 years since Arya had last seen him. His usually immaculate uniform was torn and stained, and there was a haunted look in his small eyes. When he saw Morok, he actually took a step backward. By all the ancient powers, he whispered. It's real. Sir, Arya said, maintaining military protocol despite the circumstances, reporting as ordered. Karis seemed to shake himself out of his amazement. Recruit, the situation is critical. The swarm has taken control of sections B, D, and F. They've cut our main communication lines to the outer systems, and our defensive positions are being systematically eliminated. He gestured to the main tactical display, where icons representing guard units blinked out one by one. We estimate at least 500 swarm warriors have penetrated the station. Our best intelligence suggests they're after the research data stored in the menagerie, specifically information about the predator species we've been studying. They want to know how to fight creatures like Morok, Arya realized. Exactly. And if they succeed? Karis trailed off, but the implication was clear. The swarm would gain access to data on the galaxy's most dangerous predators, potentially learning how to counter or even control them. A new alarm began sounding, and one of the tactical officers, a hegemony specialist, called out, Commander, swarm forces are massing for an assault on Section A5. That's our main data core. How many? Karis demanded. At least 50 warriors, sir, and they are moving with purpose. This isn't a probing attack. It's the real thing. Arya studied the tactical display, watching the red icons converge on the data core's position. The guard had defensive positions along the route, but they were already stretched thin. If the swarm broke through, what do you need me to do? She asked. Karis looked at her, then at Morok, then back at the tactical display. I need you to be honest with me, recruit. Can that creature really fight alongside our forces? Or is it just going to kill everything it encounters regardless of side? Arya placed a hand on Morok's armored flank, feeling the steady rhythm of its breathing. It understands the concept of allies and enemies. It won't attack guard personnel unless they threaten me or it directly. But sir, she paused, choosing her words carefully, it's not a weapon you can point and fire. It's an intelligent being with its own tactical instincts. If you want it to be effective, you have to let it fight the way it was designed to fight. And how is that? As an apex predator, fast, independent, and absolutely lethal. Karis was quiet for a moment, studying the tactical situation. Then he made his decision. The swarm assault will hit Section A5 in approximately 10 minutes. Our defensive positions will slow them down, but they won't stop them. If your partner can disrupt their attack, buy us time to reinforce the data core, consider it done, Arya said. But as they prepared to leave the command center, Commander Zethkar appeared at her shoulder. The crystalline hegemony officer's forearms were crossed, and his compound eyes glittered with what might have been malice. I cannot permit this, he announced. Releasing an uncontrolled predator during a combat situation violates every protocol we have. It's madness. With respect, sir, Arya replied, everything about the situation violates protocol. The swarm isn't following our rules. Why should we limit ourselves to theirs? Because discipline and order are what separate us from the beasts, Zethkar said coldly. The moment we abandon our principles, we become no better than the enemies we fight. Morok, who had been silent throughout the exchange, suddenly rose to its full height and took a step toward the hegemony commander. Its eyes were fixed on Zethkar's face, and a low rumble built in its throat. "Easy," Arya said quietly, making the calm gesture with her hand. Morok immediately relaxed, but its gaze never left Zethkar. "Fascinating," Dracoris said from his position at one of the research stations. "It perceived a threat to you in the commander's hostile posture and body language. That's remarkably sophisticated threat assessment for a supposedly mindless predator." Zethkar's mandibles clicked angrily. "It's a killing machine that's been temporarily pacified by tricks and conditioning. The moment the situation turns against it, it will revert to its true nature." "Then I guess we'll find out," Arya said. She turned to Karis. "Sir, permission to deploy to Section A5? The Valdorian officer looked between Arya, Morok, and the increasingly desperate tactical situation displayed on the holographic screens. Finally, he nodded. "Permission granted. And recruit?" He met her eyes with an expression that mixed hope and fear in equal measure. "Good hunting." Chapter 8, The Hunt Begins. Section A5 was a maze of corridors and chambers that housed the station's primary data storage systems. Massive server towers rose like metallic trees, their surfaces covered in blinking lights that indicated the constant flow of information throughout Teratos 9's network. Under normal circumstances, it would have been one of the most secure areas on the station. These were not normal circumstances. Arya and Morok moved through the maintenance tunnels that ran parallel to the main corridors, using the station's own architecture to approach the swarm's projected path undetected. Through access panels and ventilation grates, she could see the evidence of the enemy's advance: blast marks on walls, fallen guard personnel, and the distinctive acidic burns that marked where swarm warriors had dissolved security doors. "They're moving fast," she murmured into her communicator. "No attempts at stealth or deception. This is a direct assault." "Confirmed," Karis's voice crackled back through the station's damaged communication network. "Our forward positions report heavy contact. Estimated time until they reach the data core is 6 minutes." Arya consulted her tactical display, watching the red icons that represented swarm forces converge on their target. The main defensive line was holding, but she could see gaps beginning to form as guard units were forced to fall back under overwhelming pressure. "Morok," she said quietly, getting the creature's attention. It looked at her with those alien eyes, waiting for instruction. "We need to hit them from behind, disrupt their formation, create confusion, give our people a chance to regroup." The Pharax Prime tilted its head, considering. Then it moved to the nearest access panel and used one claw to carefully manipulate the opening mechanism. Its movements were precise and deliberate. This wasn't random destruction, but tool use. The creature was learning to interact with the station's technology. They emerged from the maintenance system into a corridor that should have been part of the swarm's rear guard. Instead, they found it empty except for the bodies of 3 guard soldiers in the distinctive slime trails that marked where swarm warriors had passed. "This is wrong," Arya said, studying the scene. "There should be reserves here, units protecting their flanks." Morok was investigating the fallen soldiers, its nostrils flaring as it analyzed scents. When it looked up, its expression was troubled. It moved to Arya and made a gesture she'd never seen before. One paw pointed toward the bodies, the other toward the direction the swarm had gone. Then both paws spread wide in what seemed to be confusion. "You're right," Arya realized. "The pattern is wrong. This isn't how pack hunters attack a fortified position." She activated her communicator again. "Command, this is Vexley. Something's not right here. The swarm advance is too narrow, too focused. They're acting like they're not concerned about flanking attacks." "Explain," Karis's voice was tense. "Sir, the silent swarm are hive mind hunters. They should be spreading out, covering all approaches, making sure nothing can get behind them. But they're moving in a single concentrated thrust toward the data core. It's like they don't care about tactical vulnerability. Maybe they're just confident in their numbers? Or maybe," Dr. Chorus's voice joined the channel, "they're operating under time pressure. If they need to access the data core before something happens." Arya felt a chill run down her spine. Before what happens? The answer came from an unexpected source, the station's general alarm system, which began broadcasting a message in the clipped mechanical tones of an automated system. Warning, reactor containment breach detected. Emergency protocols initiated. All personnel evacuate to designated safe zones. This station will undergo controlled destruction in 15 minutes. The silence that followed was deafening. "They're going to blow the station," Arya whispered. "The swarm isn't here to hold territory. They're here to grab the data and get out before everything goes to pieces." "Command, confirm reactor status." Karras's voice was strained. "Confirmed breach," came the reply from the engineering section. "Containment fields are failing. We can't stop it, but we can control when it happens. Currently set for automatic destruction in 14 minutes, 30 seconds. Arya looked at Morok, seeing her own understanding reflected in those alien eyes. The creature had lived on a world where survival meant making split-second decisions in the face of overwhelming danger. It understood the situation better than most of the guard personnel did. "Sir," she said into the communicator, "request permission to accelerate the timeline." "What do you mean?" "The swarm thinks they have 14 minutes to complete their mission and escape, but if we can stop them from reaching the data core, force them to retreat through the same corridors they used to get in." She looked at Morok again, and the creature nodded as if it understood her plan. "They'll be trapped in the station when it goes up." "That's suicide," Zethkar's voice cut through the channel. "You'll be trapped too." "Not necessarily," Arya said, her mind racing through the possibilities. "Morok knows this station's layout better than any of us. It's been studying the menagerie's security systems for 18 months. If anyone can find a way out through the damaged sections..." "You're betting your life on the tactical instincts of a predator," Karras said. "Sir," Arya replied, "I've been betting my life on its instincts for weeks. They haven't failed me yet." A new sound echoed through the corridor, the distinctive chittering of swarm warriors communicating through bioelectric pulses. They were close, probably no more than 2 corridors away. "Permission granted," Karras said finally. "Execute your plan." "And recruit?" "Yes, sir." "Try not to die. I have a feeling High Command is going to want a very detailed report about all this." Arya smiled grimly. "Copy that, sir. Vexley out." She turned to Morok, who was already moving toward the sounds of approaching enemies. The creature's entire demeanor had changed. Where before it had been calm and patient, now it radiated focused lethality. This was what it had been created for. "All right, partner," she said quietly. "Let's show them what Earth's apex predators can do when we work together." Chapter 9, The Perfect Storm. The swarm warriors appeared around the corner in perfect formation, a wedge of chitinous armor and razor-sharp claws that moved with the coordinated precision of a single organism. Arya counted at least 20 in the first wave, with more shapes visible in the shadows behind them. But Morok was ready. The Pharax Prime didn't charge blindly into their ranks as a simple predator might have. Instead, it used the corridor's geometry to its advantage, positioning itself at a choke point where the swarm couldn't use their numerical superiority effectively. When the first warriors reached striking distance, Morok became a whirlwind of controlled violence. What followed was a masterclass in predatory tactics. Morok fought with the calculated efficiency of something that had evolved to kill precisely and quickly. It used its claws to disable rather than destroy, creating wounded enemies that slowed down their companions. It used its speed to strike and withdraw, never allowing the swarm to surround it or establish a coordinated attack pattern. But most importantly, it fought with intelligence. Arya watched in amazement as the creature deliberately herded the swarm warriors into specific positions, using their own tactics against them. When they tried to advance in formation, Morok created chaos in their ranks. When they tried to spread out and flank, it eliminated the outliers and forced them back into a tight group. "It's not just fighting them," she realized, speaking into her communicator. "It's controlling them, making them react instead of act." "Confirmed," came Dr. Chorus's voice. "Telemetry shows the swarm advance has stalled completely. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." But Arya could see that Morok was paying a price for its tactical brilliance. The creature was fast and strong, but it wasn't invulnerable. Swarm claws had found gaps in its natural armor, and bioluminescent fluid from its wounds was beginning to stain the corridor walls. "We need to end this," she said, studying the tactical situation. The main swarm force was still advancing toward the data core, but this rear guard was preventing any chance of retreat. If she and Morok could eliminate them, the solution came to her in a flash of inspiration that bordered on madness. "Morok!" she called out, getting the creature's attention even in the midst of combat. "The support struts for the overhead ventilation system, can you reach them?" The Ferax Prime glanced up at the ceiling, immediately understanding her plan. The corridor they were fighting in was older than the main sections, with exposed structural elements that supported the station's environmental systems. If those supports failed, Morok disengaged from the swarm warriors with a grace that belied its size, leaping vertically to rake its claws across the critical structural points Arya had identified. The metal shrieked and sparked as the creature's naturally evolved weapons bit deep into hardened alloy. The swarm warriors looked up in confusion, their hive minds struggling to understand this new tactic. They were prepared for direct combat, not architectural warfare. The ceiling came down like the wrath of an angry god. Tons of twisted metal and environmental equipment crashed into the corridor, crushing most of the swarm warriors instantly and blocking the passage completely. The few survivors found themselves cut off from their main force, isolated and vulnerable. Morok landed gracefully among the wreckage and finished the job with clinical efficiency. "Rear guard eliminated," Arya reported, brushing dust and debris from her uniform. "Swarm retreat route is compromised." "Outstanding work," Karis replied, "but we still have the main force to deal with, and they're almost at the data core." Arya looked at Morok, who was already moving deeper into the station. Despite its wounds, the creature showed no signs of fatigue or hesitation. If anything, the successful engagement seemed to have energized it. "Then let's go finish this," she said. They moved through the damaged corridors like ghosts, using the station's own destruction to mask their approach. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red shadows, and the air was thick with smoke from damaged systems. In the distance, Arya could hear the sounds of desperate combat as the guard's final defensive line tried to hold against overwhelming odds. When they reached the data core's outer perimeter, the situation was even worse than she'd feared. The massive circular chamber that housed Teratos 9's primary information systems was under siege by at least 30 swarm warriors, while barely a dozen guard personnel held hastily constructed barricades around the central core. Commander Zethkar was among the defenders, his crystalline exoskeleton cracked and bleeding luminescent fluid as he coordinated the desperate defense. His forearms moved in perfect coordination, directing fire from multiple weapons while issuing tactical commands to the scattered guard units. But it wasn't enough. The swarm was too numerous, too coordinated, and too determined. Arya could see gaps beginning to form in the defensive line as guard personnel fell or were forced to retreat to inner positions. 8 minutes until a reactor breach," the station's automated voice announced cheerfully, as if discussing the weather rather than impending annihilation. "We're not going to make it," one of the guard defenders called out. "There are too many of them." That's when Morok stepped into the chamber. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The swarm warriors, who had been pressing their attack with mechanical precision, suddenly found themselves facing something their hive mind had no experience with. A perfect predator that fought with both intelligence and instinct. Morok didn't charge into the enemy ranks. Instead, it began to hunt. The creature used the data core's complex architecture to its advantage, turning the chamber into a three-dimensional battlefield where its natural abilities gave it every advantage. It stalked through the shadows between server towers, striking without warning and disappearing before the swarm could coordinate a response. But what truly turned the tide wasn't Morok's individual prowess. It was the way the creature's presence changed the entire dynamic of the battle. The guard defenders, who had been falling back in despair, suddenly found themselves fighting alongside something that treated the swarm as prey rather than predators. "It's working," Zethkar said, his voice filled with amazement. "The swarm coordination is breaking down. They're not fighting as a unit anymore. They're trying to respond to individual threats." Arya nodded, watching as Morok continued its deadly work. Ferax Prime evolved to hunt pack predators. It knows exactly how to disrupt group tactics. The battle became a rout. Swarm warriors who had been confident in their numerical superiority found themselves isolated and vulnerable as Moroc's attacks shattered their formations. The surviving guard personnel pressed their advantage, and within minutes the data core was secure. All swarm forces in the data core eliminated. Karras's voice crackled through the communications system. Reactor breach in 6 minutes. All personnel to emergency evacuation points immediately. But as the guard defenders began their retreat, Arya realized there was a problem. The route they'd taken to reach the data core was blocked by the wreckage from her and Moroc's earlier fight. The main evacuation routes were either compromised or too distant to reach in time. They were trapped. "This is my fault," she said quietly, watching as the other personnel searched desperately for alternative escape routes. "I blocked our own exit." Morok moved to her side and pressed its massive head against her shoulder, the gesture of comfort it had learned during their time together. But when it pulled back, there was something different in its eyes. Not resignation or fear, but determination. The creature moved to the chamber's main display console and began manipulating the interface with surprising delicacy. Its claws, designed for killing, proved surprisingly adept at operating complex technology. "What's it doing?" Zethkar asked. Arya watched as Morok accessed the station's structural databases, its 6 eyes studying the scrolling data with obvious comprehension. "It's looking for another way out," she realized. "Something we missed." The creature's head turned toward the section of the chamber's floor, and it moved to investigate. After a moment of careful examination, it began to rake its claws across what appeared to be standard deck plating. The metal parted like paper, revealing a maintenance shaft that led to the station's lower levels. "Emergency access to the docking bay," Dr. Korus said, consulting his datapad. "It bypasses all the damaged sections." "How did it know that was there?" Zethkar asked. Arya smiled. "Because it spent 18 months studying every detail of its containment system. Morok knows this station better than we do." They descended into the maintenance systems with precious minutes to spare, following the creature that had somehow transformed from a symbol of failure into their salvation. As they moved through the narrow tunnels, Arya couldn't help but think about the journey that had brought them to this point. 6 months ago, she'd been an outcast assigned to an impossible task. Now she was leading a group of elite guard officers to safety, guided by a creature that had chosen to trust her against all evolutionary logic. Behind them, Teratos 9 prepared to end its existence in a blaze of controlled destruction. But ahead lay the docking bay, an escape, and the beginning of something entirely new. Chapter 10, New to Beginnings, the Evacuation Shuttle. Last Hope cleared Teratos 9's atmosphere just as the station's reactor reached critical mass. Arya watched through the viewport as the facility that had been her home for the past months disappeared in a brilliant flash of light, taking with it years of research and the dreams of those who had believed the Chimera division could succeed. But not all dreams had died with the station. "Preliminary debriefing will begin once we reach the fleet," Lieutenant Karras announced to the shuttle's passengers, the survivors of Teratos 9's final battle. His voice was tired, but carried an undertone of something that might have been wonder. "High Command has questions about what happened down there." Arya sat near the back of the shuttle with Morok resting beside her in a specially configured section of the passenger compartment. The creature had suffered several injuries during the fighting, but Dr. Korus had pronounced them minor after a careful examination. More importantly, Morok seemed content to remain close to her, showing none of the aggression that had marked its early captivity. Commander Zethkar approached their section, moving carefully in the shuttle's cramped confines. The hegemony officer's crystalline exoskeleton still bore the marks of battle, and there was something different in his compound eyes, not the dismissive contempt she'd grown accustomed to, but something approaching respect. "Recruit Vexley," he said formally. "I owe you an apology." Arya looked up, surprised. "Sir? I was wrong about your species, about what humans could contribute to the Guard." Zethkar's forearms gestured in what she'd learned was a sign of acknowledgement among his people. "What I witnessed today, the bond between you and that creature, it challenges everything I thought I knew about the nature of intelligence and cooperation." "Morok isn't just a trained animal," Arya said quietly. "It's a partner, someone who chose to trust me despite every instinct telling it not to." "Yes, Zethkar said simply. I understand that now. He looked at Morok, who was watching the exchange with obvious interest. The question is, what happens next? It was Dr. Chorus who answered, moving forward from his position near the shuttle's medical bay. What happens next is that we rewrite everything we thought we knew about human-predator relationships. The data from today's engagement is going to revolutionize how the Guard approaches interspecies cooperation. Assuming High Command doesn't decide to classify the whole thing and pretend it never happened, Karras added with bitter experience. They won't, a new voice said from the shuttle's forward section. Everyone turned to see Admiral Synthara, the Valdorian commander of the Outer Rim Fleet, moving toward them with the careful dignity that marked her species. She was massive even by Valdorian standards, her gray hide marked with the intricate tattoos that denoted decades of service and countless victories. Admiral, Karras said, standing as much as the shuttle's low ceiling allowed, I didn't realize you were aboard. I made a point of joining this evacuation when I heard what had happened, Synthara replied. Her small but intelligent eyes were fixed on Arya and Morok. Recruit Vexley, I've been following your progress with considerable interest. The preliminary reports from today's action are remarkable. Arya felt her heart rate increase. Thank you, ma'am. Don't thank me yet, the Admiral said. What you have accomplished here represents either the greatest breakthrough in interspecies cooperation in Guard history or the most dangerous precedent we've ever established. The difference will depend entirely on what you do next. She moved closer, studying Morok with the careful attention of someone who'd spent a lifetime evaluating potential threats and allies. This creature killed 4 trained handlers before you arrived. What makes you think it won't revert to that behavior once the immediate crisis has passed? Arya considered the question carefully. It was something she'd wondered about herself during the quiet moments between battles. Because Morok isn't the same creature it was when it first arrived on Teratos 9. Neither am I, for that matter. We've grown together, learned from each other. Explain. When Morok first killed those handlers, it was acting on instinct and fear. It was isolated, surrounded by beings it didn't understand, trapped in an environment it couldn't control. But now, she placed a hand on the creature's armored flank. Now it has a reason to cooperate, someone it trusts, a purpose beyond simple survival. Admiral Synthara was quiet for a long moment, her trunk-like appendage curled in thought. The Guard has built its reputation on discipline, order, and predictable command structures. What you're describing sounds dangerously close to friendship. Yes, ma'am, it is. And you believe this friendship is strong enough to base military policy on. Arya looked at Morok, remembering the moment when the creature had chosen to trust her enough to press its forehead against hers. The gesture of a pact bond between species separated by millions of years of evolution and countless light years of space. I believe it's strong enough to change how we think about what's possible, she said finally. The shuttle's communication system crackled to life, and the pilot's voice filled the passenger compartment. Approaching the fleet flagship, Eternal Vigilance. Docking in 5 minutes. Admiral Synthara straightened, her decision made. Recruit Vexley, as of this moment, you're no longer assigned to the Chimera Division. That program is being suspended pending a complete review of its protocols and objectives. Arya felt her stomach drop. Ma'am, if this is about releasing Morok during the emergency, this is about recognizing exceptional performance under impossible circumstances, the Admiral interrupted. You're being transferred to a new program, one that doesn't exist yet, but will be created specifically to explore the implications of what you've accomplished. She turned to address the entire passenger compartment. Ladies and gentlemen, what happened on Teratos 9 today will be studied and debated for years to come. But one thing is already clear. We've learned something new about the nature of intelligence, cooperation, and trust between species. And that knowledge may well prove to be more valuable than all the weapons and technologies we've developed combined. The shuttle shuddered slightly as it entered the flagship's docking bay, and through the viewports, Arya could see the vast hangar filled with other evacuation shuttles and rescue craft. The survivors of Teratos 9 would be debriefed, reassigned, and scattered across the Guard's far-flung operations. But for her and Morok, this was just the beginning. Epilogue. 6 months later, the new facility on Kepler Station was nothing like the old Chimera division. Instead of containment units and training chambers, it featured open spaces designed for cooperation rather than domination. The Interspecies Cooperation Research Program, as it had been officially designated, occupied an entire section of the station and attracted researchers, military personnel, and diplomats from across the Constellation Guard. Aria stood in the main observation deck, watching as Morok worked with a team of Saurid engineers to solve a complex structural problem. The creature's natural problem-solving abilities, combined with its enhanced understanding of technology, had made it an invaluable consultant on projects requiring creative solutions. Hard to believe it's the same creature that terrorized Teratos 9, Dr. Chorus said, joining her at the observation window. The months had been kind to him. The haunted look was gone from his eyes, replaced by the enthusiasm of a researcher engaged in truly groundbreaking work. It's not, Aria replied, and neither am I. The program had attracted attention from across the galaxy. Other species had begun arriving with their own impossible predators, hoping to achieve what Aria had accomplished with Morok. Some succeeded, others failed spectacularly, but each attempt added to their understanding of the complex relationships between intelligence, trust, and cooperation. Any word from the Outer Rim? Dr. Chorus asked. Aria nodded toward a communication console where messages from across the galaxy waited for her attention. Admiral Synthara reports that 3 new species have expressed interest in joining the Guard. They're specifically requesting to work with human liaison officers. Because of what happened with Morok? Because of what it represents. The idea that intelligence comes in many forms and that cooperation doesn't require domination. She paused, watching as Morok carefully manipulated a piece of delicate equipment with claws designed for killing. We're not the strongest species in the galaxy, or the smartest, or the most technologically advanced, but we might be the best at making friends. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority message. Aria activated the communication console and found herself looking at Commander Zethkar, whose crystalline features were arranged in what she'd learned was the hegemony equivalent of a smile. Aria, he said, using her first name for the first time since they'd met. I wanted to inform you that the High Council has approved funding for 5 additional interspecies cooperation facilities. Your success here has convinced even the most skeptical members that this approach has merit. That's wonderful news, sir. There's more. We've received a request from a species on the edge of known space, the Ethereal Collective. They claim to have creatures that make Ferax Prime look like domesticated pets. And they want to know if a human would be willing to attempt first contact. Aria looked at Morok, who had paused in its work to watch the conversation. After 6 months together, she'd learned to read the subtle expressions that flickered across its alien features. Right now, it looked curious and perhaps a little eager. When do we leave? She asked. Zethkar's mandibles clicked in amusement. I thought you might say that. Transport departs in 1 week. And Aria? His expression grew serious. Be careful out there. The galaxy is vast, and not everything in it will be as willing to trust as your friend there. After the communication ended, Aria remained at the observation window, watching as Morok returned to its work with the engineering team. The creature that had once been the terror of the Chimera division was now a valued colleague, a trusted partner, and proof that the universe held possibilities none of them had imagined. A year ago, she'd been laughed at by officers who considered humans weak and primitive. Now those same officers requested human liaison specialists for their most challenging assignments. The galaxy, it seemed, was learning what Aria had discovered in a dark containment unit on a distant station. That sometimes the greatest strength wasn't in the ability to dominate, but in the courage to trust. Outside the station's viewports, stars beckoned with the promise of new worlds, new species, and new chances to forge bonds across the vast gulf of space and evolution. And somewhere among those stars waited creatures that would test the limits of understanding and cooperation. Aria smiled and began preparing for the next adventure. After all, the galaxy was full of predators, and she was getting very good at making friends with them.